Hello and welcome back to the third episode of this three-part series where we've been talking about PCR methods for gene therapy bioanalysis. We're now getting on to what might be the most complicated element of the conversation, which is navigating that regulatory landscape. So before we dive into that, can you talk to us about how the regulatory environment has changed since you've started working in this space?
I would say that there's definitely been more guidances issued for gene therapies and specific indications. I'd also say that more specific requirements for CMC production since the introduction of the dPCR and ddPCR. So I think that's really been one of the changes. I would say that, the community as a whole does spend time trying to harmonize and trying to work collaboratively to find what type of guidances would be best implemented and looking towards universal guidances or universal processes that are, applicable to qPCR as well.
When it comes to the current regulatory standards, what's your approach when you're developing a new PCR-based bioanalytical method? Do you have a kind of roadmap that you follow?
It's really dependent upon the context of use and what your samples are going to be looking like and what questions you have for the study. My general approach is really for any PCR method, whether it's dPCR, ddPCR, qPCR, is that your primer probe design and making sure that you have ability to test multiple different designs to ensure that you have the most optimized method. Then looking at selectivity, specificity, precision, and accuracy, those are all considerations that you need to take into account. And then lastly, looking at extraction methodologies and optimizations, and is extraction needed? And if then you are proceeding with the type of extraction, making sure that you're fully characterizing your specific drug product in the matrices that are pertinent to your study. It's kind of the plan that's always there, and then just making sound decisions based on good science data.
Can you talk to us a little bit about the harmonization efforts that are happening across the regulatory agencies? Are you seeing a real effort to harmonize? Is this still quite disjointed? What's your view on that?
There are many working groups of industry scientists that are wanting to make sure that they discuss the process and try to harmonize the best approach to make sure that, what is standard practice for one makes sense and sound for a similar type modality. So that's really an important aspect, is that there is a collaborative nature, with all of the industry science. But due to the sensitive nature of qPCR and due to all of the different type of matrices, it's sometimes difficult to harmonize across all. So you want to make sure that you do have that foundation there. And I think that's where these working groups or possible white papers have really come about to make sure, like, hey, this is what we're doing, and this is what's worked for our approach. And kind of having that peer review or that peer feedback, which is just such part of the scientific process.
What are your thoughts on the regulatory preference for single target assays alongside the industry kind of push for these higher multiplexing capabilities? How do you handle that kind of disconnect between the two?
I don't really see the disconnect. I would say, multiplexing is a great tool or a great way to create an assay. When you have a rare amount of sample, or you're using a limited sample amount instead of a single plex assay where you would have to have almost double the amount of sample. So it does create an opportunity there when there is limited amount of sample. But it does also present challenges in that you do have two competing reactions happening in the same well. So that's something that you have to take into consideration, and becomes part of the approach of the method development and optimization of the assay that's really going towards how you're approaching your sample analysis.
And if we look at validation strategies for some of these technologies, what are some of the key parameters for validating PCR assays in regulated bioanalytical laboratories?
So I would say that it follows kind of the basic validation parameters that you would see really with any sort of platform. So you're looking at precision and accuracy, specificity, selectivity, robustness of platform for your targeted method. So those are really what you're looking at. And again, it just comes down to that context of use and making sure it's what you need the method to be.
So if you can talk to us a little bit about what goes on in your lab at QPS, how is automation of PCR data analysis and interpretation, how is that happening? Can you talk us through that a little bit?
So yeah, we definitely use automation at QPS. So specifically with our liquid handlers, as well as in extraction and purification, Qiagen, Thermo Fisher, Promega, some of the big houses. This is really kind of a twofold approach to implementing automation. One is that it increases throughput in the laboratory, and two, it reduces analyst stress. So you're able to, load and go, and you're able to, repeat the same thing over and over again using the same programs and the same methodology. So it's implemented on a daily basis, I would say.
So finally, I'd like to pick your brain on something, which is around some of your advice on working with difficult sample types, with limited samples, working with inhibitor-rich matrices. What's kind of in your toolkit for tackling those situations?
I would say it's difficult to, in a generalized setting to, pinpoint one specific thing. But I would say probably the best thing in my toolkit is I've been in the industry for 10 years, and you come across new situations every single time, but you're able to use that past experience to really draw upon, okay, here's the next situation. Let's approach it, this way. I would also say probably the best part of my toolkit is the colleagues and the collaborations that you see within my department and within QPS, as well as across the industry, of really coming together to find that best approach and that best context of use to make sure that your assay suits the needs that you need at the end of the day.
Thank you so much for your time, Kate. It was so nice to be able to speak with you and get your insight into everything we've talked about today. It was just great to get your thoughts on all of that. So thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.